Welcome, and let your mind travel through time, to an era when humanity reached toward the heavens through stone and sacred geometry. Tonight, we embark on a peaceful journey through the ancient temples of our world, those magnificent structures that stand as testaments to human devotion, architectural genius, and our eternal quest to bridge the earthly and the divine. As we drift through this exploration together, we will visit the sun-baked lands of Egypt, wander through the marble perfection of Greece, experience the intricate spiritual landscapes of India, and discover the pyramid temples rising from the jungles of Mesoamerica. Let us begin our journey in the land where the desert meets the sky, where ancient Egypt's temples have stood for millennia, weathering countless storms and witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations. The very word temple, as we understand it in the Egyptian context, derives from the ancient Egyptian term HWTNTR, meaning the mansion of the god. These were not merely buildings, but living entities, believed to be the actual dwelling places of deities on earth. As we explore these sacred spaces, imagine the hot desert wind carrying the faint scent of incense, the soft padding of priests' sandaled feet on stone floors worn smooth by centuries of devotion. The Egyptian temple was conceived as a microcosm of the universe itself. Every element, from the massive pylon gateways to the innermost sanctuaries, reflected the Egyptian understanding of cosmic order, or Ma'at. When we approach an Egyptian temple, even in our imagination, we are approaching a carefully orchestrated journey from chaos to order, from the profane world outside to the sacred realm within. The typical Egyptian temple complex began with massive walls, sometimes reaching heights of 60 feet or more, built from mud brick and designed to separate the sacred precinct from the everyday world beyond. Consider the Temple of Karnak, that vast complex near modern-day Luxor that took over 2,000 years to complete. As we mentally walk through its precincts, we pass first through the massive first pylon, a gateway that stands nearly 150 feet high. These pylons, with their characteristic sloping sides, represented the horizon, that liminal space where the sun god Ra emerged each dawn to begin his journey across the sky. The very act of passing through these gateways was a symbolic death and rebirth, a leaving behind of one's earthly concerns to enter a realm where gods and humans could meet. Beyond the pylon, we enter the great courtyard, an open space where the general population could gather during festivals. Here, massive columns rise like a stone forest, their capitals carved to resemble papyrus plants or lotus blossoms, the sacred plants of Upper and Lower Egypt. These columns were not merely structural supports, but symbolic representations of the primeval marsh from which all life emerged at the beginning of time. The Egyptians believed that in the beginning, there was only none, the waters of chaos, and from these waters rose the first mound of earth, upon which the Creator God stood to bring order to the universe. As we move deeper into the temple, passing from the bright courtyard into increasingly darker spaces, we follow the same path that ancient priests would have taken each day. The hypostyle hall awaits us, that magnificent forest of columns that creates a sense of overwhelming awe even today. At Karnak, the great hypostyle hall contains 134 massive columns arranged in 16 rows. The central columns rise to nearly 70 feet, their tops opening into papyrus capitals that seem to bloom in the filtered light. Walking through this hall, we can almost hear the whispered prayers of ancient priests, the soft rustling of linen robes, the distant sound of sistrums shaking in ritual rhythm. The decoration of these temples tells stories that unfold like ancient scrolls. Every surface bears hieroglyphs and relief carvings that serve both decorative and magical purposes. The walls speak of pharaohs making offerings to gods, of cosmic battles between order and chaos, of the daily journey of the sun through the underworld. These images were not mere decoration, but were believed to be magically active, perpetually performing the rituals they depicted, ensuring the continued harmony of the universe even when human priests were absent. Moving still deeper into the temple, we approach the inner sanctum, the Holy of Holies where the cult statue of the deity resided. This progression from light to darkness, from open to enclosed, from accessible to restricted, mirrors the Egyptian conception of creation itself. moving from the chaos of the undefined to the perfect order of divine presence. Only the highest priests could enter these innermost chambers, and even they approached with careful ritual preparation, purified by sacred waters and clothed in the finest white linen. The sanctuary itself was small, intimate, a dark chamber where the god's statue resided in a sealed shrine. Each morning, the high priest would break the clay seal on the shrine's doors, revealing the divine image within. This daily ritual, known as the opening of the mouth, involved washing, clothing, and feeding the statue, treating it as a living being. The Egyptians understood that the statue was not the god itself, but rather a vessel through which the deity could manifest in the physical world. Through these daily rituals, the cosmic order was maintained, the sun would continue to rise, the Nile would continue to flood, and life would continue its eternal cycle. Let us now turn our attention to the mortuary temples, those remarkable structures built to ensure the eternal life of Egypt's pharaohs. The mortuary temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahari presents us with one of the most harmonious architectural achievements of the ancient world. Built into the cliffs of the Theban mountains, this temple rises in 3 terraces, each connected by long ramps that seem to draw the eye upward toward the sacred peak that overlooks the Valley of the Kings. The temple's design, with its repeating colonnades and clean horizontal lines, creates a sense of rhythm and peace that still moves visitors today. Hatshepsut's temple tells us much about the role of sacred architecture in legitimizing power and connecting rulers with the divine. The reliefs within depict not only religious scenes, but also the great achievements of Hatshepsut's reign, including the famous expedition to the land of Punt. Here, architecture becomes a form of eternal propaganda, asserting the pharaoh's divine right to rule and ensuring their memory would endure forever. The integration of the temple with the natural landscape also speaks to the Egyptian understanding of the sacred nature of certain geographical features. The peak that rises above the temple was associated with the goddess Merit Seeger, she who loves silence, protector of the royal necropolis. As we contemplate these Egyptian temples, we begin to understand that they were far more than places of worship. They were economic centers, controlling vast agricultural estates and employing thousands of workers. They were centers of learning, where scribes copied ancient texts and astronomer priests tracked the movements of the stars. They were hospitals where healing rituals were performed and dream interpretation was practiced. The Temple of Dendera, dedicated to Hathor, goddess of love and joy, contained a sanatorium where pilgrims could bathe in sacred waters believed to have healing properties. Patients would sleep in special chambers, hoping to receive healing dreams from the goddess herself. The symbolism embedded in Egyptian temple architecture extends to the smallest details. The floors were often painted or inlaid with images of water and marsh plants, representing the primeval waters from which creation emerged. The ceilings were decorated with stars and flying vultures, representing the sky goddess Nut stretching her body over the sacred space. Even the gradual rise in floor level as one moved toward the sanctuary, coupled with the corresponding decrease in ceiling height, created a sense of ascending toward the divine while simultaneously feeling the weight of the sacred pressing down from above. Now, let us gently shift our journey from the sands of Egypt to the rocky peninsulas and islands of ancient Greece, where temples of a different character arose, reflecting a distinctly different relationship between humans and the divine. Greek temples, unlike their Egyptian counterparts, were not seen as the literal homes of the gods, but rather as houses for the cult statues that represented them. The Greek temple, or naos, was conceived as a jewel box, a perfect container for the precious image within, visible and admirable from all angles. The development of Greek temple architecture represents one of the most influential artistic achievements in human history. From the simple wooden structures of the geometric period emerged the stone temples that would define Western architecture for millennia to come. The Greeks developed a vocabulary of architectural forms, the orders of architecture, that spoke to their desire for mathematical perfection and harmonious proportion. Each order, the Doric, Ionic, and later the Corinthian, represented a different aesthetic ideal, a different way of expressing the relationship between load and support, earth and sky. Let us stand before the Parthenon, that crown jewel of the Athenian Acropolis, and marvel at its subtle perfection. Built between 447 and 432 BCE, during the height of Athens' Golden Age, the Parthenon represents the culmination of centuries of architectural refinement. What appears to be a simple rectangular structure surrounded by columns reveals, upon closer inspection, a multitude of optical refinements designed to counteract the limitations of human perception and create an impression of perfect harmony. The columns of the Parthenon, seemingly straight and evenly spaced, actually incorporate a slight swelling called entasis, which prevents them from appearing concave when viewed from a distance. The stylobate, or platform upon which the temple sits, curves upward by about 4 inches over its length, counteracting the optical illusion that would make a perfectly straight base appear to sag. The columns lean slightly inward, and if extended upward, would meet at a point about a mile above the temple. Even the spacing between columns varies, with the corner columns being slightly thicker and more closely spaced to ensure they appear robust when silhouetted against the sky. These refinements speak to the Greek obsession with achieving visual perfection, with creating structures that appeared ideal even if that meant incorporating calculated imperfections. This pursuit of perfection extended to the proportional relationships between all elements of the temple. The ratio of the temple's width to its length, the height of the columns to their diameter, the spacing between elements, all were carefully calculated to create a sense of mathematical harmony that the Greeks believed reflected the underlying order of the cosmos. Inside the Parthenon once stood one of the wonders of the ancient world, the massive chryselephantine statue of Athena Parthenos, created by the sculptor Phidias. Standing nearly 40 feet tall, covered in gold and ivory, this statue was not merely a religious icon, but a statement of Athenian wealth and power. The gold plates that covered the statue's drapery were removable and served as part of the city's treasury, a practical fusion of religious and economic functions that characterized many Greek temples. The decoration of Greek temples tells stories both mythological and historical. The Parthenon's metopes depicted mythical battles between order and chaos, Greeks and Amazons, Lapiths and centaurs, gods and giants. These scenes were not random, but carefully chosen to reflect Athens' self-image as a defender of civilization against barbarism. The famous frieze that ran around the inner structure depicted the Panathenaic procession, showing idealized Athenians participating in their most important religious festival. Here, mortal citizens appear alongside gods, a bold assertion of Athens' special relationship with the divine. As we move through the sacred landscape of Greece, we encounter temples that served different functions and reflected regional variations in worship. The Temple of Apollo at Delphi, perched on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, was home to the famous oracle, where the Pythia, a priestess possessed by Apollo, delivered prophecies that influenced decisions of war and peace throughout the Mediterranean world. The temple's location, at what the Greeks considered the navel of the world, where 2 eagles released by Zeus from opposite ends of the earth had met, speaks to the importance of site selection in Greek sacred architecture. The approach to Delphi was itself a sacred journey, winding up the mountainside along the sacred way, lined with treasuries built by various Greek city-states to house their offerings to Apollo. Each treasury was a miniature temple, an architectural gem designed to showcase the wealth and artistic achievement of its builders. The Siphnian treasury, with its elaborate sculptural program and early use of caryatids, female figures serving as columns, demonstrates how even small structures could serve as vehicles for architectural innovation. The Temple of Hera at Olympia, one of the oldest monumental temples in Greece, shows us the transition from wood to stone construction. Originally built with wooden columns that were gradually replaced with stone over centuries, the temple contained columns of various styles and periods, a physical record of evolving architectural techniques. This gradual transformation from perishable to permanent materials reflects the Greek desire to create structures that would endure, that would carry their messages of devotion and cultural achievement into eternity. Let us now consider the magnificent Temple of Zeus at Olympia, which once housed another wonder of the ancient world, the colossal statue of Zeus created by Phidias. The temple itself, built in the severe Doric style, created a dramatic contrast with the elaborate chryselephantine statue within. This juxtaposition of austere architecture and opulent decoration speaks to the Greek understanding of the temple as a container for the divine image, a frame that should enhance, but not compete, with the sacred presence within. The Greeks also developed distinct temple types for different deities and functions. The tholos, a circular temple form, appears at various sacred sites including Delphi and Olympia. These round structures, with their rings of columns and conical roofs, may have been associated with chthonic deities, gods of the underworld and earth. The tholos at Delphi, built in the early 4th century BCE, showcases the Doric order on its exterior and the more delicate Corinthian order in its interior, demonstrating the Greek architects' growing confidence in mixing architectural vocabularies. Mystery religions required different architectural solutions. The Telesterion at Eleusis, where the Eleusinian mysteries were celebrated, was not a conventional temple, but a great hall of initiation. Unlike typical Greek temples, which were designed to be viewed from the exterior, the Telesterion was an interior space, capable of holding thousands of initiates who would witness sacred dramas that promised them a blessed afterlife. The architecture itself was part of the mystery, with its forest of columns creating a disorienting space where normal perceptions were challenged and transcendent experiences facilitated. The Temple of Hephaestus in Athens, overlooking the ancient agora, stands as one of the best preserved Greek temples, allowing us to experience something close to its original appearance. Built around the same time as the Parthenon, but on a more modest scale, this temple demonstrates how the principles of Greek temple architecture could be successfully applied at different scales. The friezes depicting the labors of Heracles and Theseus remind us that Greek temples served not only religious, but also civic functions, reinforcing cultural values and shared mythologies. As Greek culture spread throughout the Mediterranean following the conquests of Alexander the Great, Greek temple architecture adapted to new contexts and influences. The Temple of Apollo at Didyma in Asia Minor, with its massive scale and unique open-air inner court, shows how Greek architectural principles could be elaborated and expanded. The temple's oracle chamber, accessed by a dark vaulted passage, created a dramatic architectural experience that enhanced the mystery and power of prophecy. Let us now gently transition from the measured perfection of Greek temples to the exuberant complexity of Indian sacred architecture, where temples become entire cosmic diagrams rendered in stone. Indian temples, whether Hindu, Buddhist, or Jain, represent some of the most symbolically rich and architecturally complex religious structures ever created. Here, architecture becomes a three-dimensional mandala, a sacred diagram that maps the structure of the universe and provides a pathway for spiritual ascent. The Hindu temple, or mandir, is conceived as the earthly dwelling of a deity and simultaneously as a representation of the cosmic mountain, Mount Meru, the axis of the universe in Hindu cosmology. Every element of the temple's design, from its overall plan to the smallest decorative detail, carries symbolic meaning. The temple is built according to precise rules laid out in ancient texts called the Shilpa Shastras, which specify proportions, orientations, and ritual requirements that ensure the structure will serve as an effective conduit between the earthly and divine realms. As we approach a classic South Indian temple, such as the Brihadisvara temple at Tanjavur, we are immediately struck by the Gopuram, the monumental gateway tower that marks the transition from the profane to the sacred world. These towers, covered with thousands of colorful sculptures depicting gods, demons, humans, and animals, are visual encyclopedias of Hindu mythology. Each figure tells a story, teaches a lesson, or represents an aspect of the divine. The Gopuram serves not only as a gateway, but as a beacon, visible from great distances, calling devotees to worship and announcing the presence of the divine in the landscape. Passing through the Gopuram, we enter a series of concentric courtyards, each representing a different level of sanctity. The outermost courtyards are spaces of preparation and community gathering, where devotees can purchase offerings, receive blessings, and participate in religious festivals. As we move inward, the spaces become progressively more restricted and more sacred. This journey from the outer to the inner represents the spiritual journey from the material world to union with the divine. The main temple structure rises before us like a mountain sculpted from stone. The Vimana, or tower above the main shrine, reaches toward the heavens in a series of diminishing stories, each a miniature replica of the story below, creating a sense of infinite regression that mirrors the Hindu concept of endless cycles of creation and destruction. At Tanjavur, the Vimana rises to over 200 feet, topped by a massive capstone weighing approximately 80 tons. How this enormous stone was raised to such a height in the 11th century remains a subject of wonder and speculation, though it likely involved the construction of extensive earthen ramps. The walls of Indian temples are covered with sculptures that blur the boundary between architecture and art. Every surface becomes an opportunity for religious instruction and aesthetic delight. The famous temples at Khajuraho, built between the 10th and 12th centuries, display some of the finest sculptural programs in world art. The sculptures depict not only gods and goddesses, but also scenes from daily life, musicians and dancers, loving couples, and even erotic scenes that have generated much discussion and interpretation. These erotic sculptures, far from being mere decoration, may represent tantric practices, fertility symbolism, or the idea that all aspects of human experience, including sexuality, are part of the divine creation. The interior of the Hindu temple follows a carefully orchestrated sequence of spaces. The Ardhamandapa, or entrance porch, provides a transitional space where devotees can prepare themselves mentally and spiritually for the encounter with the deity. The mandapa, or pillared hall, serves as a gathering space for communal worship and religious instruction. The columns of the mandapa are often elaborately carved with images of gods, celestial beings, and mythical creatures, each pillar a work of art in its own right. Moving deeper into the temple, we approach the Garbhagriha, literally the womb chamber, the dark, cave-like sanctum where the main deity resides. This space is deliberately small and dark, creating an intimate setting for the encounter between devotee and deity. The darkness recalls the primordial void from which creation emerged, and entering this space symbolically returns the worshipper to that moment before creation, where all possibilities exist. Only priests may enter the Garbhagriha to perform the daily rituals of waking, bathing, dressing, and feeding the deity, treating the sacred image as a living presence. The sculptural program of Indian temples extends to the smallest details. Door guardians, or dvarapalakas, flank entrances, protecting the sacred space from evil influences. Ceiling panels display elaborate geometric patterns and cosmic diagrams. Brackets supporting overhanging eaves take the form of yalis, mythical lion-like creatures, or salabhanjikas, tree spirits that represent the abundance of nature. Even the joints between stones may be carved with tiny figures, ensuring that every element of the structure contributes to its sacred function. Let us explore the remarkable rock-cut temples of India, where entire structures were carved from living rock, sculpted from the top down in a process that required extraordinary planning and skill. The Kailasa Temple at Ellora, carved from a single volcanic rock formation in the 8th century, represents one of the most ambitious architectural projects ever undertaken. Workers removed an estimated 200,000 tons of rock to create this temple, which reproduces in stone all the elements of a structural temple, including a gateway, courtyard, and main shrine. The temple represents Mount Kailash, the Himalayan peak that is the mythical abode of Lord Shiva, brought symbolically to the Deccan Plateau. The Buddhist temple architecture of India offers different interpretations of sacred space. The stupa, that distinctive dome-shaped structure, began as a simple burial mound but evolved into a complex architectural form rich in symbolism. The Great Stupa at Sanchi, begun in the 3rd century BCE and elaborated over several centuries, provides us with a complete example of this architectural type. The stupa's hemispherical dome represents the world mountain and the dome of heaven. The square base represents the earth. The spire emerging from the top, composed of circular discs of decreasing size, represents the axis connecting earth and heaven, the various levels of consciousness, or the stages of enlightenment. Devotees worship at a stupa by performing pradakshina, circumambulating the structure in a clockwise direction, following the path of the sun across the sky. The gateways, or toranas, at Sanchi are masterpieces of sculptural art. covered with scenes from the Buddha's life and previous incarnations. Though interestingly, the Buddha himself is not depicted in human form, but represented by symbols such as an empty throne, footprints, or a Bodhi tree. This aniconic phase of Buddhist art reflects early Buddhist reluctance to depict the Buddha in human form, seeing him as having transcended physical existence. The rock-cut caves of Ajunta and Ellora preserve some of the finest examples of Buddhist temple architecture and art. These caves, carved over a period of several centuries, include both viharas, residential halls for monks, and chaityas, prayer halls containing stupas. The chaitya halls, with their distinctive horseshoe-shaped windows and barrel-vaulted ceilings, create acoustic spaces perfectly suited for chanting. The pillars dividing the halls into nave and aisles recall the arrangement of later Christian churches, though the similarity is coincidental, arising from similar functional requirements. The paintings at Ajunta, preserved by centuries of abandonment and rediscovered in the 19th century, show us that these temples were originally riot of color. The paintings depict scenes from Buddhist texts with a naturalism and emotional depth that speaks across centuries. The famous Bodhisattva Padmapani, with his serene expression and graceful posture, embodies the compassionate ideal of Mahayana Buddhism. These paintings remind us that ancient temples were not the austere stone structures we see today, but were alive with color, filled with the smoke of incense, the sound of chanting, and the movement of devotees. The Jain temples of India present yet another variation on Indian sacred architecture. Jain temples, while sharing many features with Hindu temples, have their distinctive characteristics. The emphasis on non-violence in Jainism leads to particularly careful attention to avoiding harm to any living creature during construction. The use of white marble in many Jain temples, particularly those at Mount Abu and Ranakpur, creates spaces of ethereal beauty where light becomes a tangible presence. The Dilwara temples at Mount Abu, built between the 11th and 13th centuries, showcase marble carving of such delicacy that the stone seems transformed into lace. The temple at Ranakpur, dedicated to Adinath, the first Tirthankara, contains 1,444 intricately carved pillars, no two exactly alike. The forest of pillars creates a space that seems to extend infinitely, where one can easily become lost in contemplation. The play of light through the carved marble screens creates ever-changing patterns throughout the day, making the temple a kind of solar clock where the passage of time is marked by shifting shadows and highlights. This integration of natural light into the architectural experience reflects the Jain understanding of enlightenment as a form of inner illumination. Now let us journey across the ocean to the lands of Mesoamerica, where temples took the form of artificial mountains rising from jungle and plain. The pyramid temples of the Maya, Aztec, and other Mesoamerican civilizations represent a unique architectural tradition that developed independently from Old World models, yet shares certain universal themes: the temple as cosmic mountain, the sacred ascent, the joining of earth and sky. The Mesoamerican temple pyramid served multiple functions: religious center, tomb, astronomical observatory, and symbol of political power. These structures were not static monuments, but living architectural organisms that grew over time. It was common practice to build new temples over older ones, encasing the previous structure like the layers of an onion. This practice of superimposition meant that temples became physical timelines, archaeological layer cakes that preserved the history of the site. The Pyramid of the Moon at Teotihuacan, for example, went through at least 7 stages of construction over several centuries. Let us ascend the steps of the Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, that remarkable structure that serves as a 3-dimensional calendar. Each of the pyramid's 4 sides has 91 steps, which together with the top platform total 365, the number of days in the solar year. The 9 terraces of the pyramid, divided by the staircases, create 18 segments on each side, corresponding to the 18 months of the Maya calendar. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, the play of light and shadow on the pyramid's northwest corner creates the illusion of a serpent descending the stairs, a phenomenon that still draws thousands of visitors and demonstrates the sophisticated integration of astronomy and architecture in Mesoamerican temples. The orientation of Mesoamerican temples was rarely arbitrary, but carefully calculated to align with celestial events. The Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan, one of the largest structures in the ancient Americas, is oriented to face the point on the horizon where the sun sets on specific days important to the agricultural calendar. The cave discovered beneath the pyramid, whether natural or artificial, may have represented the mythical cave from which humans emerged or the underworld through which the sun traveled each night. This integration of natural features with constructed architecture appears throughout Mesoamerican temple design. The Temple of Inscriptions at Palenque reveals another function of Mesoamerican pyramids as royal tombs. When archaeologist Alberto Ruz discovered a hidden staircase within the pyramid in 1949, it led to one of the most spectacular archaeological finds in the Americas, the intact tomb of Kinich Janab Pakal, a 7th century Maya ruler. The sarcophagus lid, with its intricate carving depicting Pakal's descent into the underworld and rebirth as a god, represents one of the masterpieces of Maya art. The pyramid above the tomb serves not merely as a marker, but as an engine for the king's transformation and apotheosis. The decorative programs of Mesoamerican temples employed a variety of media, carved stone, modeled stucco, and painted murals. The vibrant murals at Bonampak, discovered in 1946, revolutionized our understanding of Maya art and culture. The paintings depict court ceremonies, battle scenes, and ritual bloodletting with a vividness and detail that brings the ancient Maya to life. The figures are not idealized types, but individuals with distinct features and expressions, reminding us that these temples were built by and for real people with complex lives and motivations. The Aztec Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan, now buried beneath Mexico City, exemplified the dual nature of Mesoamerican religion. The temple was actually a double pyramid, with twin shrines at the summit dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun, and Tlaloc, the god of rain and agriculture. This duality, war and agriculture, destruction and creation, reflects the Aztec understanding of the universe as maintained through a balance of opposing forces. The temple was the site of elaborate ceremonies, including human sacrifice, which the Aztecs believed was necessary to keep the sun moving across the sky and prevent the end of the world. The ball courts associated with many Mesoamerican temple complexes represent a unique architectural form that combines sport, ritual, and cosmology. The Great Ball Court at Chichen Itza, the largest in Mesoamerica, has remarkable acoustic properties. A whisper at one end can be clearly heard at the other, over 500 feet away. The game played in these courts was more than sport. It was a ritual reenactment of cosmic battles between light and darkness, order and chaos. The ball itself represented the sun, and its movement through the court symbolized the sun's journey across the sky and through the underworld. As we contemplate these magnificent structures from across the ancient world, certain universal themes emerge. The temple as Axis Mundi, the center of the world connecting the three cosmic levels of underworld, earth, and heaven. The temple as Imago Mundi, a representation of the cosmos in miniature. The temple as the meeting place between human and divine, where the boundary between the mortal and immortal becomes permeable. Yet each culture expressed these universal themes through its unique architectural vocabulary, shaped by local materials, climate, technological capabilities, and religious concepts. The construction of these temples represents enormous investments of resources and labor, often spanning multiple generations. They were not built by slaves, as popular imagination sometimes suggests, but by skilled craftsmen and willing laborers who saw their work as a form of devotion. The logistics of temple construction, organizing workforces, quarrying and transporting stone, developing new technologies and techniques, drove innovations that benefited society broadly. The precise stone-cutting techniques developed for Greek temples influenced all subsequent Western architecture. The concrete formulas perfected for Roman temples, though the Romans are beyond our current scope, revolutionized construction. The astronomical observations required to orient Mesoamerican temples advanced mathematical and calendrical knowledge. Temples also served crucial social functions beyond their religious roles. They were centers of education, where priests preserved and transmitted knowledge. The House of Life attached to Egyptian temples functioned as scriptoriums, libraries, and schools. Greek temples housed treasuries and served as banks, making loans and storing wealth. Indian temples were and continue to be major landowners and economic institutions, supporting vast networks of employees and dependents. Mesoamerican temples were the stages for elaborate theatrical performances that reinforced social hierarchies and cultural values. The acoustic properties of ancient temples deserve special consideration, as sound was crucial to religious experience. The long reverberation times in Egyptian hypostyle halls would have transformed spoken prayers into an enveloping wash of sound. The precise acoustics of Greek theaters, often associated with temple complexes, allowed thousands to hear clearly without amplification. The resonant frequencies of Indian temples were carefully calculated to enhance the effect of chanting and music. The echo effects in Mesoamerican ball courts and pyramids created supernatural voices that seemed to emerge from the structures themselves. Color, largely lost to us now, was integral to the ancient temple experience. Egyptian temples blazed with painted reliefs in brilliant blues, reds, yellows, and greens, their colors symbolically meaningful and magically potent. Greek temples, which we imagine as pure white marble, were actually painted in bright colors, a fact that shocked early archaeologists. Indian temples burst with polychrome sculptures, their colors renewed regularly as part of ongoing worship. Mesoamerican pyramids were covered with smooth plaster and painted in symbolic colors, red for blood and life, blue-green for water and vegetation, yellow for corn and the sun. The role of water in temple design crosses cultures. Egyptian temples incorporated sacred lakes for ritual purification and to represent the primeval waters of creation. Greek temples often arose near springs considered sacred to particular deities. Indian temples feature elaborate systems of tanks, wells, and fountains, with water serving both practical and symbolic purposes. The stepped wells of Gujarat combine hydraulic engineering with temple architecture, creating subterranean spaces where the journey to water becomes a spiritual descent. Mesoamerican temples channeled water through elaborate drainage systems that may have created dramatic effects during rainstorms, with water cascading from serpent-mouthed spouts. Light, too, was manipulated for sacred effect. The orientation of Egyptian temples ensured that sunrise on particular days would illuminate the sanctuary's cult statue. The Parthenon was oriented so that sunrise on Athena's birthday would shine directly through the eastern door onto her statue. Indian temples use pierced stone screens to create patterns of light and shadow that shift throughout the day. The Temple of the Sun at Konark was designed as a giant chariot of the sun god, with the play of light across its surfaces marking the passage of time. At Newgrange in Ireland, though predating our temple cultures, we see this same concern with sacred light, as the winter solstice sunrise penetrates the passage tomb's inner chamber. The gardens and landscapes surrounding temples were not afterthoughts, but integral to the sacred experience. Egyptian temples included sacred groves, particularly of sycamore and palm trees, which provided shade and symbolized regeneration. Greek sacred groves, such as the one at Dodona where Zeus spoke through the rustling of oak leaves, show that temples were not always buildings, but could be natural spaces marked as sacred. Indian temples traditionally include gardens with plants mentioned in religious texts, creating botanical libraries of sacred flora. The cosmic symbolism extends to these gardens, with their layout often representing paradise or the ideal cosmic order. Let us consider the experience of pilgrimage to these ancient temples, for they were not merely local shrines, but destinations that drew devotees from vast distances. The journey itself was part of the sacred experience, a form of spiritual preparation. Egyptian pilgrims traveled the Nile to visit temples at Abydos, Dendera, and Philae, their boats becoming floating temples filled with songs and prayers. Greek pilgrims walking the sacred way from Athens to Eleusis for the mysteries underwent a transformative journey that prepared them for initiation. Indian pilgrims still follow ancient routes, visiting temples in prescribed sequences that recreate mythological journeys. The Maya Sakbiab, or White Roads, connected temple sites across hundreds of miles, creating pilgrimage networks that unified diverse communities. The festivals held at ancient temples brought these structures to vibrant life. The Opet festival at Thebes saw the cult statues of Ammonius, Mut, and Khonsu carried in golden barks from Karnak to Luxor, with the entire population participating in processions, feasts, and celebrations. The Panathenaic festival at Athens culminated in the presentation of a new peplos, or robe, to Athena, with the entire city participating in processions, competitions, and sacrifices. Indian temples continue to host elaborate festivals where deities are taken in procession through the streets, temporarily breaking down the boundaries between sacred and secular space. The Aztec calendar was filled with festivals centered on the Templo Mayor, some joyous celebrations, others solemn occasions requiring fasting and bloodletting. The daily rhythms of temple life followed patterns that varied by culture but shared common elements. The Egyptian temple day began before dawn with the morning hymn to awaken the deity. Priests performed elaborate purification rituals, shaving their entire bodies and washing in a sacred lake before entering the temple. The cult statue was unveiled, washed, dressed, and presented with offerings of food, flowers, and incense. Similar daily rituals characterized Greek and Indian temples, though the specific practices varied. In India, the deity is still awakened with music, offered multiple meals throughout the day, and put to rest at night, maintaining traditions thousands of years old. The role of music and dance in temple worship cannot be overlooked. Egyptian temples employed corps of musicians and dancers. Temple reliefs show singers, harpists, flutists, and drummers performing for both gods and worshippers. Greek temples hosted competitions in music and poetry as part of religious festivals. Indian classical dance forms like Bharatanatyam originated as temple dances, with Devadasis, servants of the deity, performing sacred narratives through movement. The movements of these dances were not arbitrary but followed precise symbolic vocabularies, with hand gestures, facial expressions, and body positions conveying specific meanings. Mesoamerican temples resonated with the sounds of drums, flutes, and conch shells, with music serving to induce trance states and facilitate communication with the divine. Let us now explore the astronomical functions of ancient temples in greater detail, for these structures served as observatories and calendars, tracking celestial movements crucial for agricultural and religious cycles. The Temple of Ammonius Ra at Karnak includes a series of chambers aligned to observe the winter solstice sunrise. Egyptian priests used these observations to maintain their calendar and predict the annual Nile flood. The circular structure known as the caracole at Chichen Itza contains windows aligned to observe the extreme positions of Venus, a planet of great importance in Maya astronomy and mythology. The ability to predict celestial events enhanced the priest's authority and reinforced the connection between earthly temples and cosmic order. The sacred geometry underlying temple design reflects sophisticated mathematical knowledge. The use of the golden ratio in Greek temples created proportions pleasing to the eye and believed to reflect divine harmony. Indian temple architects employed complex geometric systems based on mandalas, sacred diagrams that represented the structure of the cosmos. The Vasta Purusha mandala, the fundamental planning diagram for Hindu temples, divides space into a grid, with each square associated with particular deities and cosmic forces. The placement of architectural elements according to this grid ensures that the temple functions as a properly tuned spiritual instrument. The question of how ancient peoples achieved such architectural precision with limited technology continues to fascinate us. Recent discoveries have revealed some techniques, such as the use of primitive transits for surveying, wooden templates for repeated carved elements, and sophisticated leverage systems for moving massive stones. Yet many mysteries remain. How were the precisely fitted stones of Sacsayhuaman placed without mortar? How were the massive roof beams of Karnak raised into position? How did Maya architects calculate the complex curves of corbelled arches? These questions remind us that ancient builders possessed knowledge and skills that we are still working to understand. The destruction and preservation of ancient temples tells its own story of cultural change and continuity. Many Egyptian temples were defaced by early Christians, their reliefs chiseled away or covered with plaster. Greek temples were converted into churches, their orientations reversed, and their decorations modified. Indian temples suffered under various invasions, with many destroyed or damaged, though the tradition of temple building continued and continues today. Mesoamerican temples were systematically destroyed during the Spanish conquest, their stones used to build churches and palaces. Yet fragments survive, in reused stones, in buried foundations, in overgrown ruins reclaimed by jungle, bearing witness to the beliefs and achievements of their builders. The rediscovery and restoration of ancient temples beginning in the 18th and 19th centuries has shaped our modern understanding of the past. Early archaeologists, often more interested in treasures than structures, caused significant damage. The use of dynamite at some sites destroyed irreplaceable information. Yet gradually, more scientific approaches developed. The painstaking reconstruction of the Parthenon, the clearing and restoration of Angkor Wat, the excavation of the Templo Mayor. Each project has revealed new aspects of ancient temple architecture while raising questions about how much restoration is appropriate and whose heritage is being preserved or recreated. Modern archaeological techniques continue to reveal new information about ancient temples. Ground-penetrating radar has discovered previously unknown chambers and passages. Chemical analysis of paint fragments has revealed original color schemes. Archaeoastronomy has decoded celestial alignments. Experimental archaeology, attempting to recreate ancient construction techniques, has provided insights into the practical challenges faced by ancient builders. Digital modeling allows us to visualize temples as they originally appeared and to test theories about their acoustic and visual properties. The influence of ancient temples on later architecture extends far beyond literal copying. The Greek orders became the foundation of Roman architecture and, through Rome, influenced all of Western architecture. The Renaissance rediscovery of Vitruvius's treatises on architecture, based on Greek principles, shaped European building for centuries. The British Museum, the United States Capitol, countless banks and courthouses all echo the forms of Greek temples. Indian temple architecture influenced the development of Southeast Asian temple complexes like Angkor Wat and Borobudur. Mesoamerican pyramid forms have inspired modern architects from Frank Lloyd Wright to contemporary designers seeking to reconnect with pre-Columbian traditions. Yet we must be careful not to approach these temples merely as architectural artifacts. They were living spaces, filled with the hopes and fears, joys and sorrows of the people who built and used them. The graffiti scratched by ancient pilgrims on temple walls, recording their prayers and presence, reminds us that these were human spaces. The worn steps, polished by millions of feet over millennia, speak of countless individual journeys of faith. The smoke-blackened ceilings in inner sanctuaries preserve the residue of countless offerings. These traces of use humanize these monumental structures, reminding us that they were built by and for people not so different from ourselves. The economic impact of temple construction rippled through ancient societies. Quarrying stone required developing extraction techniques and transportation networks. The demand for skilled craftsmen created specialized guilds that preserved and transmitted technical knowledge. The need for rare materials, gold for Egyptian statues, marble for Greek temples, precious stones for Indian sculptures, stimulated long-distance trade. Temples became economic engines, employing thousands directly and supporting entire communities indirectly. The town of Carrara still quarries the marble that built ancient Rome, a direct economic link to the classical past. Let us examine more closely the symbolic programs of temple decoration. For every carved figure and painted scene carried meaning. Egyptian temple reliefs depicting the pharaoh smiting enemies were not merely historical records, but magical acts, perpetually defeating chaos to maintain cosmic order. The labors of Heracles on Greek temples represented the triumph of civilization over wild nature, of human wit and strength over monstrous forces. Indian temple sculptures of loving couples, the Mithunas, represent the creative union of cosmic principles, the joining of Purusha and Prakriti that generates the universe. Maya's stele recording dates and astronomical events anchored temples in cosmic time, linking human history to celestial cycles. The treatment of sacred images within temples varied significantly across cultures. Egyptian cult statues were hidden from public view, seen only by priests during daily rituals. Greek cult statues, while housed within temples, were often carried in procession during festivals, temporarily accessible to all. Indian Murthis are regularly bathed, dressed, and adorned, treated as living beings requiring care and attention. The question of whether the image is the deity, contains the deity, or represents the deity has been answered differently by different traditions, but all agree that these images serve as focal points for devotion and vehicles for divine presence. The role of sacrifice in temple worship, though difficult for modern sensibilities, was central to ancient religious practice. Egyptian temples processed vast quantities of offerings, bread, beer, meat, flowers, incense, which were presented to the gods and then redistributed to temple personnel. Greek temples were the sites of animal sacrifice, with the smoke of burning fat rising to please the gods while the meat was shared among worshippers. Indian temples continue to receive offerings of flowers, fruit, and other foods, which become prasad, blessed food distributed to devotees. Aztec temples witnessed human sacrifice on a scale that shocked even battle-hardened Spanish conquistadors, yet within the Aztec worldview, this was necessary to prevent cosmic catastrophe. Water management in temple complexes demonstrates sophisticated engineering. The drainage systems of Minoan palaces and temples could handle heavy rainfall without flooding. Roman temples, though beyond our immediate scope, pioneered the use of concrete that could set underwater, allowing for elaborate fountain systems. Indian stepwells combined water storage with temple architecture, creating cool underground spaces for worship and meditation. The cenotes, natural sinkholes, associated with many Maya sites, served as water sources and sacrificial sites, with temples built at their edges to facilitate ritual use. The question of who could enter temples and which spaces they could access reflects ancient social structures. Egyptian temples had zones of increasing restriction, with common people limited to outer courtyards, while only pharaohs and high priests could enter the Holy of Holies. Greek temples were generally more accessible, though certain mysteries were restricted to initiates. Indian temples traditionally restricted access based on caste and gender, though these restrictions have evolved over time. Mesoamerican temples seem to have been accessible during public festivals, but restricted at other times. These patterns of inclusion and exclusion shaped how different groups experienced the sacred. The reuse and adaptation of temple sites across cultures and time periods shows the enduring power of sacred space. Churches built over pagan temples, mosques constructed from temple materials, modern temples rising on ancient foundations, all demonstrate continuity in sacred geography. The Temple Mount in Jerusalem, sacred to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, exemplifies how single sites can accrue layers of meaning across millennia. The Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, though built as a Christian church, incorporated columns from pagan temples and later became a mosque, embodying in its very stones the complex history of religious transformation. Let us turn our attention to the workshops and construction sites where temples took shape. The organization of labor, the division of tasks among specialists, the systems for quality control, all required sophisticated management. Masons' marks on Greek temple stones identify individual craftsmen or work crews, allowing us to track their contributions. Indian Shilpis, hereditary temple craftsmen, preserved techniques and iconographic traditions across generations. The Amanticas, Aztec master craftsmen, worked precious materials into temple decorations of extraordinary refinement. These skilled workers were not anonymous laborers, but respected professionals whose expertise was essential to creating effective sacred spaces. The tools used in temple construction evolved over time, but retained surprising consistency. Copper and bronze tools gave way to iron, allowing for more precise stone carving. The bow drill, used from Egypt to Mesoamerica, enabled craftsmen to create precise circular perforations. The development of compound pulleys and cranes allowed for the manipulation of increasingly massive stones. Yet much work remained dependent on human muscle, patience, and skill. The polish on granite surfaces, achieved through countless hours of grinding with sand and water, represents human persistence as much as technical knowledge. Consider the experience of entering these temples at different times of day and seasons. Dawn at an Egyptian temple, as the first rays illuminate the sanctuary, transforming dark stone into golden radiance. Noon at a Greek temple, when harsh sunlight creates sharp shadows that emphasize the mathematical precision of the architecture. Dusk at an Indian temple, as oil lamps are lit and the sculptures seem to come alive in flickering light. Night at a Maya temple, when torchlight dances across carved facades and painted murals glow in warm oranges and reds. Each lighting condition revealed different aspects of the temple's character, ensuring that repeat visits always offered new experiences. The seasonal festivals that punctuated the temple calendar created rhythms of intensity and relaxation, celebration and contemplation. The said festival in Egypt, celebrating royal jubilees, transformed temples into theaters for elaborate rituals of renewal. The city Dionysia in Athens brought theatrical performances to the precinct of Dionysus, blending religious worship with artistic competition. Diwali in India still sees temples illuminated with thousands of lamps, creating galaxies of light that transform architectural spaces into cosmic visions. The Aztec New Fire ceremony, held every 52 years, saw all fires extinguished and rekindled from a flame lit at the Templo Mayor, literally reigniting civilization from its sacred center. The relationship between temple architecture and the human body appears across cultures. Egyptian temples incorporated proportions based on human measurements, the cubit derived from the forearm's length. Greek temples reflected idealized human proportions, with columns like stylized human figures. The measurements of Indian temples derive from the cosmic man, Purusha, whose body forms the template for sacred architecture. This anthropomorphic aspect of temple design suggests that these structures were conceived not as alien impositions on the landscape, but as extensions of human presence, magnified to divine scale. The role of dreams and visions in temple practice deserves attention. Egyptian healing temples included dormitories where patients slept, hoping for healing dreams from the gods. Greek incubation rituals at temples of Asclepius followed similar patterns, with suppliants receiving medical advice through dreams. Indian temple traditions include numerous accounts of deities appearing in dreams to provide guidance or request specific offerings. Maya vision serpents, induced through bloodletting rituals performed in temples, allowed rulers to communicate with ancestors and gods. These practices position temples as gateways not just between earth and heaven, but between waking and dreaming consciousness. The preservation of knowledge in temple contexts extended beyond religious texts to include medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and history. The library at the Temple of Horus at Edfu contained texts on temple building, religious rituals, and medical treatments. Greek temples housed important documents, treaties, and civic records, taking advantage of their sacred inviolability. Indian temple libraries preserved not only religious texts, but also works on grammar, logic, and philosophy. Maya codices, though few survive, were kept in temple complexes and contained astronomical tables, historical records, and mythological narratives. Temples thus served as universities and archives, preserving human knowledge across generations. As we near the end of our journey through these ancient sacred spaces, let us reflect on what they tell us about human nature and aspiration. The universal human impulse to create sacred spaces, to mark certain locations as special, as different from ordinary reality, speaks to our need for meaning beyond material existence. The enormous resources invested in temple construction, often in societies where most people lived in simple dwellings, shows the priority placed on connecting with the divine. The care taken with details that would never be seen by human eyes, carvings on ceiling beams, foundations buried in earth, suggests these structures were built for divine rather than human audiences. The mathematical and geometric principles underlying temple design reflect a belief in cosmic order that transcends cultural boundaries. Whether expressed through Egyptian sacred triangles, Greek golden ratios, Indian mandalas, or Maya calendar calculations, these principles suggest that ancient peoples saw mathematics not as abstract human invention, but as the language of divine creation. By building according to these principles, temple architects participated in the ongoing creation and maintenance of cosmic order. The orientation of temples to celestial phenomena reminds us that ancient peoples lived in intimate relationship with the sky. Without electric lights to dim the stars, without tall buildings to block the horizon, they observed celestial cycles with an attention we can barely imagine. Temples served as instruments for maintaining this cosmic awareness, their alignments ensuring that human activities remained synchronized with celestial rhythms. The modern visitor to these sites, checking sunrise times on a smartphone app, experiences only a pale echo of the profound connection ancient peoples felt with the cosmos. Yet we should not romanticize ancient temple cultures. These were complex societies with their own inequalities, conflicts, and contradictions. Temples were instruments of political power as much as religious devotion. The labor that built them, while often willing, was sometimes coerced. The wealth they accumulated was not always used for society's benefit. The exclusion of certain groups from temple spaces reinforced social hierarchies. The human sacrifices at some temples involved real suffering and loss. Understanding ancient temples requires acknowledging both their spiritual grandeur and their social complexity. The legacy of ancient temples extends into our contemporary world in unexpected ways. Modern architecture continues to grapple with questions first addressed by temple builders: how to create spaces that inspire awe, how to use light and proportion to affect emotion, how to integrate structures with landscape. Contemporary artists draw inspiration from temple iconography and symbolism. New religious movements often attempt to recreate imagined ancient temple practices. The heritage tourism centered on ancient temples provides economic benefits while raising questions about preservation and cultural ownership. As our exploration draws to a close, let us imagine ourselves standing before these temples one final time. Feel the rough texture of weathered stone beneath your fingertips, stone shaped by ancient hands for purposes we can only partially understand. Hear the echo of footsteps in vast halls where millions have walked before us. Smell the lingering traces of incense that has perfumed these spaces for millennia. See the play of light and shadow that has marked the passage of days and seasons since these structures were new. These temples stand as testaments to human creativity, devotion, and the eternal quest to touch the divine. They remind us that across all cultures and ages, humans have felt the need to create special spaces where the ordinary world gives way to something greater. In their weathered stones and fading paintings, we see reflections of our own spiritual yearnings, our own desire to understand our place in the cosmos, our own hope that existence has meaning beyond the material. As you drift toward sleep, carry with you images of these magnificent structures. Let your mind wander through columned halls and sacred chambers. Ascend pyramid steps toward star-filled skies. Stand in the darkness of inner sanctuaries where ancient gods once dwelt. These temples, though separated by thousands of miles and years, are united in their purpose to serve as bridges between earth and heaven, between human and divine, between the known and the mysterious. May these ancient stones appearing in your dreams tonight remind you of the enduring human capacity for beauty, meaning, and transcendence. May their mathematical harmonies bring order to your thoughts. May their sacred geometries structure peaceful visions. And may you wake tomorrow with a renewed sense of wonder at the magnificent legacy our ancestors have left us, carved in stone, reaching toward eternity. The temples sleep now in moonlight and starlight, as they have for countless nights, waiting for tomorrow's sun to once again wake their stones to golden life. They have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of countless generations, yet they endure, patient and eternal, holding their secrets and their wisdom for any who approach with open hearts and quiet minds. Let their ancient peace settle over you like a soft blanket. Let their timeless strength support you like solid bedrock. Let their reaching toward heaven lift your spirit even as your body relaxes into rest. These temples, built by human hands but inspired by divine visions, stand as eternal reminders that we are more than flesh and bone, that we are beings capable of creating beauty that transcends time, meaning that survives millennia, and sacred spaces where the human and divine can meet. Sleep now, and in your dreams, may you walk these sacred paths, climb these holy mountains of stone, and stand in these chambers where gods once walked. May the wisdom of the ancients whisper to you across the centuries, and may you wake refreshed, renewed, and reconnected to the great chain of human spiritual seeking that links us all, from the first temple builders to today, in our shared quest for meaning, beauty, and connection with something greater than ourselves. The temples stand in silence now, bathed in soft darkness, their stones cooling after the day's heat, settling into the earth with small sounds like gentle sighs. They rest, as you rest, gathering strength for tomorrow, for all the tomorrows to come, eternal in their patience, magnificent in their endurance, sacred in their silence. Let their peace be your peace. Let their strength be your strength. Let their eternity remind you that some things endure, that some beauty survives, that some meanings transcend the temporary troubles of our brief lives. Rest well, dream deeply, and know that these temples, these magnificent dreams in stone, will still be standing when you wake, testimony to the greatest of human achievements, the creation of sacred space, the building of bridges between earth and heaven, the eternal human reach toward the divine. May their ancient blessings follow you into sleep and guard your dreams until the dawn.